Hi, in this video I like to give a brief overview of the stomach. I'll first talk about its structure, both macroscopically and microscopically. Then I'll talk about the function, and finally I'll talk about diseases and the various drugs that we use to treat stomach diseases. First, everyone knows at least a little bit about the stomach. The stomach is the organ where acid is secreted and the body begins the process of digestion. The stomach is divided into three main parts. The part closest to the esophagus, the cardia. Further out, the fundus. And then the main body of the stomach, the corpus. And then finally, the area closest to the small intestine or the duodenum, the pylorus or antrum. Different types of cells inhabit different parts of the stomach, but we won't go too much into detail. In general, the stomach has a lot of folds. These are called rugae, and in these folds there's a lot of cells that can both line the surface and inhabit the little parts or the little infoldings, the glands or the pits. I'll talk about what kind of cells are on the surface and in the glands. But first, we have to remember that the stomach is a very low pH organ. In fact, the stomach pH can go as low as 1 and typically doesn't go much above 4, whereas the rest of the body is generally near a pH of 7.4. So this means that the stomach must work really hard to secrete protons and a lot of other factors to protect the stomach, even as there's such a caustic lumen. So, on the very surface of the stomach, there are mucosal cells. There are both neck mucosal cells and surface mucosal cells, which secretes an alkaline, which means basic, layer of mucus and a lot of other protecting enzymes to prevent protons from reaching too close to the epithelial cells. At the bottom of the cells are both endocrine cells, cells that regulate or that can tell the rest of the GI system what to do, or if there's food in the stomach, as well as parietal cells. Parietal cells, which typically are drawn as baseball diamond-like shapes, are these cells that actually secrete the protons and are typically described as this shape, with this facing the surface, because there are canaliculi, which are small invaginations, which typically don't open until the stomach is activated, but can join together with vesicles that are filled with enzymes. These enzymes are the proton chloride exchangers, ATPases, which pulls chloride outside, or pulls protons outside, and pulls potassium back in. I won't go too much into the cellular mechanism, but this is essentially how the body builds a gradient of high proton concentrations in the stomach. In addition to these, in the middle of these glands are stem cells, which can migrate both up and down to replenish the various cell types. So, after taking a brief look at the structure, let's look at the function. In addition to parietal cells, there's something called ECL cells. ECL cells, or endochromaffin-like cells, secrete histamine. Histamine is actually a positive regulator of proton secretion, which activates the stomach and causes secretion of acid by the parietal cells, by the H2 receptor. In addition to ECL cells, there's also something called G cells. G cells, being very creative, secrete gastrin. Gastrin is another peptide which activates parietal cells, but also activates ECL cells. So I'll circle the cells as to not confuse the cells versus the regulatory molecules. And gastrin is recognized by CCKB type receptors, which are activated, increase the amount of intracellular calcium inside the parietal cells, and also increases the amount of proton excretion. In addition to these endocrine systems, or endocrine regulation, the body also is, or the body activates the stomach by the PAN system. The PAN system, which we'll remember, is the rest or digest part of the nervous system, which secretes acetylcholine and also positively influences the parietal cells. In addition, the acetylcholine also acts upon ECL cells, which also will increase the amount of histamine secreted and also cause increased secretion. There are two main ways how the body can stop secretion, or when we've already finished eating and there's no more things in our stomach that needs acid. First are D cells. D cells secrete something called somatostatin, which not only directly inhibits the parietal cells, but also inhibits the ECL cell secretion. In addition to somatostatin, there's CCK, an enzyme secreted by the duodenum, which decreases the motility of the stomach, as well as secretin. These are three main molecules that decrease the activity inside the stomach. This complex set of regulation is what's really important in both disease and in drugs. For example, when you have too many cells secreting gastrin, you can create a symptom. You can have an effect called the Zollinger-Ellison syndrome, in which there are too many G cells, or there are hyperplasia, just too many cells, which causes too much gastrin, which causes too much proton secretion, and can cause dysregulation in the stomach and cause peptic ulcer disease. We'll talk more about that after describing a couple of the major diseases or symptoms that can occur with dysregulation of the stomach. So first and foremost, I like to talk about dyspepsia. Let's use a different color for the diseases. I will use orange. Dyspepsia refers to basically a lot of the very common heartburn types of symptoms, except related to the stomach. It can be described as burning, bloating, gnawing, aching, or fullness, and can be associated with indigestion, and is typically referred to the epigastric region, which is the upper middle part of the abdomen. It can be the result of peptic ulcer disease, or I'll abbreviate as PUD, as well as gastroesophageal reflux disease. So this is a symptom of chronic heartburn, in which acid from the stomach pushes back up into the esophagus and causes different kind of changes. And finally, catch-all can also be non-ulcer dyspepsia. So first, when we talk about peptic ulcer disease, peptic ulcer disease is what people associate, or ulcers are essentially these small holes in the stomach that causes erosions, which are small indentations in which there's less epithelium and less of the mucus, to ulcers, which are bigger holes that can actually penetrate the multiple layers of the epithelium, in the previous lecture, we talked about what are the different types of layers. And finally, they can cause perforations, in which this hole can go into other local regions, such as the liver, into the peritoneum, which causes an infection, into the pancreas, and a bunch of other places. Peptic ulcer disease. Although one would expect that it can be caused by acid, the body actually does a very good job in regulating the amount of acid that it can handle, and this is usually not the main cause of peptic ulcer disease. In fact, the two main causes of peptic ulcer disease, which account for 95% of all the peptic ulcer disease, are first a bacteria called Helicobacter pylori. This is a bacteria that, despite the low pH of the stomach, actually resides in the stomach. And the Nobel Prize, I think in either 2009 or 2008, was given to the scientist who proved that Helicobacter pylori causes the vast majority of ulcers, and also can be drug-induced, particularly by NSAIDs. NSAIDs are a class of non-steroid anti-inflammatory drugs, which include aspirin, ibuprofen, naproxen, which is Advil, and celecoxib, and a bunch of other drugs that inhibit cyclooxygenase. They usually work by decreasing the amount of They usually work by decreasing prostaglandin synthesis, especially PGE, and also decreases the amount of platelets. So are usually helpful to prevent clots.